when you consider the Sri Lankan situation, our military has performed extremely well. We have taken all the precautions to minimize or prevent civilian casualties, and all the actions to prevent major disasters when you consider to the civilians. Whereas I can very with authority I can tell that our military is the number one when you consider the other armies which are involved in similar conflicts. There are more displaced persons in these areas, more civilian casualties in these areas, but in our case we have taken all the precautions to prevent civilian casualties, and we have, in reality, we have shown that, from the very beginning we introduced this concept, zero casualties concept, and we took a lot of precautions in doing our, performing our duties or operations to see that the civilians are not harmed, and we were very successful. But the LTT ultimately took all these civilians as a shield to protect themselves. At the very beginning, from the very beginning, they were saying that they are fighting for the freedom of the Tamil people. But ultimately, you see what they did. They took the civilians to protect themselves. Ultimately, Prabhakaran and all their leadership was keeping the civilians as a shield to protect themselves. They were not protecting the civilians, but civilians, they were using the civilians to protect them. But there were so many suspicions and speculations that there will be tens of thousands of people will die, by trying to do these operations. But on the 20th of April, we proved to the world, it's a reality now, that we could do this operation. We know how to do that, the way the military act countering a terrorist hideout or terrorist counterattack or terrorist burn was different from the tactics they adopted to rescue the civilians. And they showed it to the world. It's a reality now. They showed how within 3 days they rescued over 100,000 people. But it's very unfortunate these some international community who are putting pressure on us that they don't want to understand or realize this situation. So that's why they are continuously putting pressure on us, taking the humanitarian issue as a point. They are targeting on that. But we have performed very much better than any country or any army when it comes to handling the civilians. With less civilian casualties, less IDPs, and the more important factor is we have sacrificed our soldiers, taking more casualties to our side to prevent any civilian casualties. That is why at the latter stages we restricted the use of heavy weapons, indirect fire. We restricted using air attacks. We did all that to prevent civilian casualties. That is what is important. The important factor is, what have we taken to prevent civilian casualties. That is the important thing. We have done a lot of things to do that, and we were very successful, and I think we should compliment our forces for that, to doing that, to understand, to differentiate the terrorist and the civilians and changing their strategies and tactics accordingly.
On that point also, speaking of the civilians, a huge influx of civilians crossed over to the government-controlled areas. Now, from the beginning, when civilians were crossing over to government-controlled areas, there was a lot of pressure for the government from NGOs, international aid organizations, and again some factions of the international community to open doors for aid missions to visit these IDP camps and to provide full access for aid groups to visit the internally displaced people and in their camps. Now, what are these restrictions? What is the hampering of access for these aid missions? And of course, why have these restrictions been put in place?
Now, we have given the full access to all these organizations, especially UN organizations and the selected INGOs and NGOs. There's a fair number of INGOs and NGOs. This is again, I think, wrong propaganda interpretation by various interested parties. There is no, the the UN, all the UN organizations are present in these areas. We had given access to the ICRC everywhere that when we received these IDPs, wherever we were screening them and registering them, the ICRC were present, and in the camps, the UN agencies are there. But of course, administratively, the people who are responsible for maintaining these IDP camps have put various restrictions that are necessary. For example, I was told, because I am not in charge of these IDP camps, but I was told that there's a restriction on using heavy, these luxury vehicles inside these camps. The reason being, now there are, I think, 50 odd UN organizations, INGOs, NGOs operating. Now imagine, now each and every organization using 2 vehicles, if minimum if you say 2 vehicles, there will be 100 vehicles moving in this camp. And see you can imagine the situation of the IDPs. They will raise dust and all the fumes and all these difficulties. So there are certain restrictions put by these people who are administering this. And at the same time, you must remember, you have to be concerned of the security situation, the safety of the IDPs. Now, earlier, when we had these IDP camps in the eastern province, these UN organizations came and complained that certain of their equipments have been